This Mamar is a Mamar from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it's from the year Tufshin Daled, which is 1942. So there's a Sefer HaMaimarim of all the Maimarim of that year, Tufshin Daled. That's where this Mamar comes from. So far, we don't have a translation of it in English, so we'll have to work with the Hebrew. And the Mamar is on a pasuk in Parshas Vayechi. So the first thing we should do is look at the pasuk to see what the Mamar is talking about. Let's turn to, in the booklet, to page 29. 29, 30, and first turn 29. So this is Parshas Vayechi, where Yaakov is speaking to every one of his children before his passing. And then comes the point where he's talking to his son Yosef. And he says to him as follows. This is where it's underlined on top of the page. Vani Nasati Lecha, and I have given you Shchem Echad Alachecha, one share more than your brothers. The word Shchem in this context is translated as a share. Every brother has a share in the land, every tribe has a share in the land, and you, I gave a double portion. It doesn't say double, it says one more share more than your brothers. And this is what I took from the hands of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. So we know that in Eretz Yisrael there were 7 nations: Kanani, Achiti, Ameri, Aprizi, Ayivusi. We say it in davening. It's of course, in the Chumash. So he's specifying that this land that I'm giving you, where was it before? Which of the 7 tribes was there? It was Ameri. And he finishes off saying, I took it with my sword and my bow, which means I had a war with them, and I used my sword and bow and arrow to conquer it. However, if you turn the page to page 30, so first look at Onkelos. As you know, every pasuk in Chumash has a translation which is called Targum Onkelos. So Onkelos was in the times of there's a big story behind him. I think you're probably familiar with the story. He was the nephew of the Roman emperor, and he became a Jew. And he became not just a Jew, but became a very big tzaddik. And he wrote this. It's not really, it's a translation, but it's a translation / commentary on the Chumash. And every Chumash has this printed. There's also, the custom is from halacha for a man that every Friday we're supposed to go over the whole parsha, read the parsha, every pasuk twice, and one time read this translation. So it's Aramaic. And the words Mechaber V'kashta, which means my sword and my bow, on the surface is a little bit strange because we don't find a story in Chumash anywhere that Yaakov went to war to conquer any part of Israel from any of the 7 nations. So he says, my sword and my bow means tzelusi u'ba'usi, with my davening and with my requesting, my prayers. If you look at the other side of the next page, 31, we have Rashi's commentary, which is also similar, where it's underlined, and it says, I took it with my sword and my bow. So Rashi says, it's a reference to his wisdom and his prayer. Chochmasei tfilasei. So both are saying the same thing, that it doesn't mean physically a sword and a bow and arrow. Either it means his davening or it means his learning. And that's what it means, that that's how he conquered the land. So let's go back to the Mamar, first page, and we'll have a better understanding. Ani Nasati Lecha Shchem Echad Alachecha Asher Lakachti Miyad Ameri B'charbi B'kashti. This is the passage we just read. The Targum, so the Targum Onkelos gives the translation. Ano Yehovah Sloch, this is Aramaic. It means I gave you chulak chad, one portion, yatir alachecha, more than your brothers. The nesivos, that I took it, miyada the Amorah, from the hands of the Amorites, b'tsalusi ubo usi, with my prayers and my requests. I knew. This means the Yaakov Medila Yosef. Yaakov is informing Yosef. Asher noisan lo chelik echad, Yosef masher noisan l'shar hashpatim echad. That all the brothers, each one is the head of a tribe, they all have a portion in Eretz Yisrael, but to you I'm giving an additional portion more than your brothers. And then he also is informing him and explaining him that this portion that he's giving him has something unique about it. This portion, which is designated to Yosef, that's more than his brothers. So he told him, this is a portion of that I conquered it from the hands of Amorites. So that's the second point. Number one, that he's giving him one portion more, and number two, we should know where I'm taking it from. Then he also informs him, through which means did he get it? How did he get it? When you get something, you can buy it, you can get it as a gift, you can get it one way, you can get it another way. So he told him, I got it through my sword and my bow. And Rashi Zal Pirush, and Rashi says, what does that mean? B'charbi b'kashti is chachmasei or tfilasei. So chachmasei would mean his Torah study, and tfilasei means his prayer. So this whole Mamar is about davening. It's a insight into the davening. As the Mamar always usually the pattern of Mamar is usually bring a pasuk. Then there are questions on the pasuk. Then the Mamar goes in to explain a concept, and then goes back after understanding this concept. We can go back and understand the pasuk and answer the questions. So it's not like other commentary. We have a question, and the next line comes the answer. In the Mamar, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes you're learning the Mamar, you even forget what the question was in the first place because you go off on a whole different subject. So. And there's another question that's necessary to explain. Ma bo Rashi zal chadish. What is it that Rashi comes to add? Al pirish hatargum b'charbi b'kashtim b'tzalusi b'osi. The Targum, as I said before, was one of the Tanoim, so he was hundreds of years before Rashi, and he already gave his commentary, and he writes that it means my prayers. But Rashi says something a little bit different. Chochmasai utfilasai. So obviously Rashi is coming to say something which is likely different or adding something to what the Targum says. What is the specific implication by saying Chochmasai utfilasai? Another thing needs to be understood. Why does it say I'm giving you an additional one portion? Not additional. One, I'm giving you one portion. It would have been enough to say Shchem alachecha. I'm giving you a portion above your brothers. Kloimer, that would mean Chelik Neisef Alecha. I'm giving you an additional portion more than I gave your brothers. Uma bother rabbis, what is being added here by saying the word echad? The of Shalomer, what's the question? Because you can't say Shemira Goydla Kabus, that this indicates how big the portion is. Because you don't know what the other portions are. When you say this is bigger than that, if you don't know what that is, then bigger than that means nothing. So being that he didn't spell out how big the other portions are, so by saying one portion, that doesn't explain anything. It doesn't make anything more clear. So he should have said, I'm giving every tribe X amount of square miles or whatever, or acres, and I'm giving you one additional portion to that. So firstly, it should have said how much is giving to echad ve'echad mashvatim, each and every one of the tribes. Then it would make sense to say, chelik echad, I'm giving you one portion, so it's measured according to the portions that he gave the brothers. Vayabarur, and then it would be clear, asher kavanase ala kamus. By saying echad, it means to describe the quantity, how big it is. But being that it doesn't describe, kamus means the quantity. What was the actual physical size of the other parts, the other portions? Moving, so it's understood when it says giving you one additional portion. It's not only about size. So what is it? Something in terms of importance, in terms of its spiritual content. So we need to understand what is the implication, what is the intention by adding the word shchem echad, one portion. From everything that was said, we understand, turn the page. By the way, if anyone has this sefer in front of them, that's online. It's page 97 in that sefer. Mamar Tavshin Dalet. From these words that he said, I'm giving you a portion above your brothers, moving, it's understood that it's not just in terms of size. So Maila Govaya Mimailis Madregas Achecha B'chol Zeh Yesh Leyachas B'Shaychas LeMadrega Shemadregas Achecha. That it's a portion that in terms of its importance, in terms of its spiritual significance, it's way beyond the brothers. In other words, Eretz Yisrael in general is a land that has more importance than any other land in the world. It has more kedusha, more holiness to it. And we know that even in holiness there are levels. For example, Yerushalayim has in it more kedusha, more holiness than all of Eretz Yisrael. So obviously every part of the land has a certain spiritual quality to it. And the spiritual quality in each part of the land actually corresponds to what are the needs and what is the function of that tribe. In other words, every tribe is different than the other. They're not just different because they have different names. They have different functions, they have different shlichos, different mission. Like we find actually in this parsha that Yaakov Avinu compares one tribe to a lion, compares another tribe to a different animal, and different symbols. What are these symbols? It means that every tribe has a specific shlichus, a specific mission in this world. And for that reason, Hashem designated a different part of the land for each tribe. It means that this part of the land in the north is conducive for that tribe to carry out their mission. And that's why Hashem designated this tribe should be in the north. This tribe has a different mission. So for them, the most suitable place in Eretz Yisrael is in the south. This tribe is on the mountains. These tribes are plain land, all those differences. So that means that when that land has in it certain spiritual importance and significance, by saying that your piece, your share is more than your brother's, it shows us two things. Number one, that it's much more. Number two, but it's something that is still close to the importance of the brothers' share. Because if it would be something that would be totally of a different caliber, we wouldn't say giving you a share above your brother. Just say, I'm giving you something different. So the fact that he says above your brothers means there's a connection. This is a principle, by the way, that you find it a lot in Chassidus and Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe says, when you say this is more than something else, on one hand, you're saying it's more. On the other hand, the more fact you're saying that's more than something else means there's some comparison between the two things. For example, if somebody would introduce you and say that she's the smartest woman much more than all the first graders in our school. Would that be a compliment or an insult? But is it true that you know that you're greater than all the first graders? Sure. So why is it an insult? It's true. Because when you say this person is smarter than all the first graders, that means that they're somewhat in the same caliber, and this one is more than that. So adult would say this person is smarter than all the 12th graders, than all the people that are in that all the people that have PhD. This person is smarter than them. So it means this is someone who also is of the same caliber and has more than them. So if it says that his portion is more than the brothers, that means number one, it's more, but on the other hand, it's somewhere in the same caliber. And what is it? These are all questions that don't give any answers. As is one of the Mefarshim on the Chumash, it's printed in every Bikras Gedelis Chumash, writes, Pirish B'tam Zchiris, he explains, why does he mention that I took this land from Amori? Why does he point out which of the 7 tribes? Like we know that all the tribes conquered different parts of the land, but it's not spelled out which part of the land used to belong to which tribe. But by Yosef it says the land that I gave you used to belong to Amori. Why does he point it out? So Rabbi Nezer writes that the reason is amongst the 7 nations, this nation was the mightiest, they were the strongest. So we need to understand what does this mean in terms of our serving Hashem, that there's a difference between one portion, another portion, and Amori is the strongest, and that's Yosef. All these things have to be explained, and then to understand how we can apply this in our personal avodah. Next paragraph. Let me just explain that there are certain Maimarim. Most Maimarim are a single Maimar that explains a pasuk. However, starting from the Rebbe Marash, which is the 4th Rebbe of Chabad, he introduced something new. It's called the Hemshech. Hemshech is a continuation, which means he said a Maimer on Shabbos, and then the next week, the next Maimer of the next week was actually a continuation, a deeper explanation, and a continuation of what he said the week before. And the next week was again continue to elaborate on the same subject. How long would this go for? Sometimes 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks. And they take all those weeks to elaborate all on the same subject. So every time there was a continuation, they would briefly mention what was said before, and now we'll continue. So that's a hemshech. And that most of the time it's not that way. Most of the time it's just one single mimer, self-contained. But sometimes it's a hemshech. I mentioned the other day that the Rebbe Rashab has 2 outstanding of these kind of maimarim. One that lasted for a few years, and that has 144 parts, and another one has 60-something parts, which means it was said over a period of 60 maimarim, 60 weeks. So what you're reading here is part of we'll call it a series of maimarim, where they're elaborating on one piece, and that's this paragraph is sort of recapping what it said before. Yes.
I have a silly question. Can you tell me the difference between a minor and a sikha?
Difference between a mimer and a sikha. And why do you think it's a silly question?
I feel like
It's not.
I might
No.
know the answer.
No. Yeah.
And I both know.
Generally speaking, the literal meaning of the word sikha means conversation. So a sikha means where a Rebbe speaks about certain subjects. For example, when our Rebbe gave sichas, the sichas could have been about Rashi, could have been a sikha about a Rambam, which is not Chassidus. It could have been about current events, what's happening in the world in Eretz Yisrael. Sikha means a talk. A mimer is usually pure Chassidus. It was pure Hasidic thought, and usually not really related to current events. It's totally removed, just explaining Hasidic thought. There was also a difference in the way it was said. When the Rebbe said a Mamar, it was different than when he said a Sikha. Because of that, when he said a Mamar, everybody would stand up. Sikha, everybody would do sitting. It's more, the Sikha has more of a casual connotation to it. And in fact, by the other Rebbes of Chabad, when they would say a Sikha, it would also be even more casual. They could have been sitting by the table without their hats and just sitting by the table and talking. But Sikhs weren't that many. That wasn't a place where all the Hasidim were there, just certain selected Hasidim, either family members or older Hasidim, but it was more casual. By our Rebbe, the Sikha is the setting of the Sikha, just like the Mamar, which means it's for all the Hasidim, for men, for women, everybody is able to come in. But the Mamar was different. So first of all, there was a special niggin that they sang before the Mamar as a preparation. Second of all, when the Rebbe said the Mamar, his eyes closed. The Mamar itself was said in a special tone. Another point is that when the Rebbe, this is all the Rebbes of Chabad, when they said a Mamar, they were holding a cloth in their hand, a physical object in their hand. What exactly it meant, we don't know, but it's assumed that it means that a Mamar is a very spiritual experience when the Rebbe gives out a Mamar. It's not just giving a commentary. It's at that moment he becomes a conduit for something spiritual being revealed through him, and he held on to something physical sort of to be grounded. So how many things did I mention? Number one, there's a niggin before the Mamar. Number two, the Mamar itself is said with a special niggin. Number three, it's said with closed eyes. Number four, everyone stands up by the Mamar. And number five, the Mamar itself is more pure Chassidus, unrelated to current events, and it's not about other subjects other than Chassidus.
Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Is it always like about something from the Torah, passage from the Torah specifically, or?
Most of the time, a Mamar begins with a passage from the Torah. It always begins with a statement, either a pasuk, like in this Mamar, or sometimes a statement from the sages and from Gemara or Medrash, or sometimes a Mamar just begins with the words like, to understand this and this subject. That could also be a beginning. The Rebbe was explaining that the beginning line is like the passport to get into the Mamar. Yes? No. Sikha, for example, the Rebbe's Farbrengen. The Rebbe's Farbrengen was much more than other Farbrengens, but by the way, by other Rebbe's of Chabad, the Sikhas were very few throughout the year. By our Rebbe, it was every Shabbos and, so much more. The Rebbe was pouring Chassidus. But a Sikha, a Farbrengen of Sikhs could sometimes last for hours and hours and hours and hours. A Mamar was usually a half hour.
I feel like a Mamar is so much more to grab from the Sikha is very easy to dive into, but a Mamar,
Because, like I said, the Sikha is something a little bit lighter, and a Mamar is usually more pure Chassidus.
do people look to certain Mamars to learn certain lessons, or?
Of course, yeah. Every Mamar is like this Mamar is about davening. The Mamar we learned before was about nisyonos, about tests.
Right.
So depends where I'm holding. If I right now feel the urgency to know more about davening, I'll learn this Mamar. If I have the urgency to pass a test, I'll learn that Mamar. Yeah.
What niggin was sung before the Mamar? Oh.
It's a niggin. You'll ask the Madrichot, they'll probably the shluchas, they'll probably be able to sing it to you. But it's the niggin actually is a niggin which is associated with niggin achana, right? But there's two. When you say niggin achana, there's two. One is the niggin achana that they sang before the Alter Rebbe's niggin. It's also called niggin achana. So that's a achana for the Alter Rebbe's niggin.
Which is sung at the wedding? No,
The Alter Rebbe's niggin is sung by a chuppah, right?
Right.
And the Alter Rebbe's Nigun wasn't sung at all occasions, only in special occasions. But before they sang the Alter Rebbe's Nigun, that also needed a preparation. So the Rebbe was saying to sing the Nigun Hachana for the Alter Rebbe's Nigun. And that Nigun Hachana is a Nigun that's associated with the Rebbe Rashab. It's called the Nigun from Rostov. Rostov is the city where the Rebbe Rashab lived. The Nigun before the Mamar happens to be also a Nigun associated with the Rebbe Rashab. It's also a Nigun from Rostov. And that's called the Hachana. Hachana means preparation, and that's a preparation for a Mamar. So one is a preparation for a Mamar, one is preparation for the Alter Rebbe's Nigun.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So I'm not going to do that piece in the middle because we didn't learn the Mamar, so it'll just be confusing. And we're going to start from the new paragraph. It says Tezvav, Vihine.
I have a small question. Can you just understand, explain the previous about the איך, like I didn't quote it.
About what? The question?
לא השאלה, שכתוב שכם אחד, ומה היחס לזה? If it's not the physical, כאילו, אם זה לא ביחס ל...
Asian coach that it's not just about the physical quantity.
Not about that.
רק חשיבות. ושנית, מצד אחד החשיבות של חלק זה הרבה יותר מהאחים. מצד השני יש לו איזה ערך לזה. כי אם לא היה לו ערך כלל, אי אפשר להגיד זה יותר מהאחים. That's why I gave an example. If you say that this person's smarter than a 3-year-old, it's an insult. It's not a compliment. Why? Even though it's true, because if you're saying smarter than a 3-year-old, that means that there's some error between them. If you want to bring out that an intelligent person is smarter than others, you'll say smarter than people that are like him, intelligent, educated, and then it makes sense. So if I say that his portion is greater than their portion, so it's a matter, for one hand, it's greater. On the other hand, yesh eize erech ben achshivut shelo v'achshivut shelem. Yeah. So now he's going to explain, being that we learned there that my bow and arrow and my sword is davening, that means there's something in davening that's compared to a bow and arrow, and there's something in davening that's compared to a sword. Now, first of all, who's going to war? We're going to daven. What's the war over here? And the answer is, yeah, there is a war. It's a war with our Nefesh Bahamas. The davening is about conquering our Nefesh Bahamas. So there's a war going on. I have within me a force that has to be refined and elevated and conquered. And therefore, I need weapons. And the weapons are Harbi and Kashti. He's going to explain that it's different parts of the davening. There's a part of the davening that's compared to a sword. There's a part of the davening that's compared to a bow and arrow. But first, we need to understand what is the difference between a sword and bow and arrow. The davening the Shemona Esrei, that's Bekashti. Shebo Achar Avodah the Krishma, and that comes after Kriya Shema. So Kriya Shema is like the sword, and the davening is like the bow and arrow. Which means, as we'll soon learn, just like the Gashmi, there's a difference between a sword and a bow and arrow.
What is
Yes,
going on?
Keshet, the Kashti. So there's a difference. The Gashmi is between this weapon and that weapon. So to Baruchmi, there's a difference between the spiritual bow and arrow and the spiritual sword regarding our Nefesh Bahamas. So the word Bakashti, the letters Bakashti, which means a bow, are the same letters as the word Bakashasi. Bakasha means request. And that's what Shemona Esrei is. We're asking Hashem for our requests. So Bakashti is Shemona Esrei, and Shema, the Kriya Shema, is like the sword. So before he explains it, he first gives a general introduction to something about the davening. Hine kol aveda tzarich is musudara. Every aveda has to be musudara, means it has to be with a certain order. Hein v'gul v'etzem ha'avoda. First of all, the avoda itself has to be Masuda, has to be with the structure and a seder and an order. The protein in the details. V'hein b'hagdima v'ichut. Also in terms of what comes first or what comes second. The sidre avoda b'zeh hazeh. So first of all, the word avoda, which literally means service, but in Chassidus, when we use the word avoda, we're talking about self-refinement. Yes, davening is avoda, learning is avoda, giving tzedakah is avoda. Avoda means serving Hashem. Everything is serving Hashem. But the specific term avoda, which is used in Mamar, usually means the avoda of refining myself, having more refined seichel, more refined midos, more refined character traits. It should be more tuned into godliness. And that refinement, that avoda, refining myself, is something that has a structure to it. It's not just kaplap, whatever you do, is just do it. But again, and you have to add though, our generation is a little bit kaplap. There's actually an expression in the Sichas. In Yiddish you say machaptarain, you grab the opportunity, whatever comes up to your hand. But there's a term in Gemara, chatayv v'achol, chatayv v'shsi, which means just grab whatever you can to eat, grab whatever you can to drink. It's a metaphor, which means sometimes you do have to do things in an orderly fashion, and sometimes you just grab what you can. To compare begashmis, if you're going out to work or you're going out to a wedding, and you're getting ready to go, so you have a seder what you do first, what you do second, you prepare, you get this clothes, those clothes, your shoes, your this, your that, and then you go. If God forbid there's a fire, you don't sit down with a piece of paper, okay, what do I have to do first? You just grab whatever you can and you run. So we're living in a time now where there's a fire, and the fire is a gullus, is burning and it's ending, and we have to get out of gullus. So we're not so into this idea as much, but nevertheless, in general, there is a seder. When it comes to Avodas Hashem, there's a seder. There's an order that this comes first, and then comes that, and then comes the next level. Today, where it's very common, everybody uses it. It's called a quart. When you wash your hands, it has two handles. Years ago, it wasn't so common, and one handle. So having the two handles was like going the extra mile. So he told the story how the Frierdiker Rebbe had two incidents. One incident, he was at a place, he was washing his hands, they had the two handles for the Rebbe. And then another chassid walked over to take it, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, relax, like, this is not for you. This is, in other words, you're not at that place where you should be using the two handles. There was another incident where the Frierdiker Rebbe washed his hands, and the other chassid went to take the one with one handle, and he said to him, why don't you wash with the two handles? In other words, once you've accomplished or achieved this level of your self-refinement, you go on to the next. And after that, you go on to the next. And after that, you go on to the next. There's a certain order. You can't do the thing that comes later, do it before. There's an order to the avodah. Again, another example, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but by Hasidim, there's something called Maimed. Maimed is something that the Hasidim would always give money to the Rebbe. Like, where does the Rebbe live from? Because he has a salary, how does all that work? So the custom always was, by all the Rebbes, Hasidim would give money to the Rebbe. It wasn't that we're supporting the Rebbe. On the contrary, it was about another way that we connect to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe would only take Maimed from Hasidim. It was something personal. The personal connection between the Rebbe and a Chassid was expressed in this way. So one time there was a certain rabbi, that visited the previous Rebbe, and he heard about this thing with the Maimed, so he took out money and he gave it to the Rebbe. So what's this? So he says, I want to give Maimed. That's what it's called, Maimed. So he said to him, but I only take Maimed from Hasidim. So the Rebbe said, so the man said to the Rebbe, so I'll become a chassid. So he said, yeah, but that's not what you start with. It's not what you start with. You have to start with other things. Start learning chassidus, and then you'll get to this place. So there's a certain order to avodah. They say that they saw this person walking down the street and he was bumping into the poles on the street. And they asked him, what are you doing? So he says, I heard that professors, they bump into poles because they're so absent-minded. So I want to become like a professor. Yeah. It's a good idea, but you don't start by bumping into poles. You start by getting an education, and you get so into your studies and you become so absent-minded that you bump into the poles, but you don't start off by bumping into poles. So therefore, there's a say that first I have to achieve one thing, then I go to the next. So Tchilat Tzarchis Avodah de Krishma. First is Avodah Krishma, Shema. Shzeu Cherev, this is a sword. And a sword shall stay pierced with two sides. Which means that there's sometimes a sword that's sharp only on one side, and sometimes there's a sword that's sharp on both sides. In the previous Mamar, he actually went into that, because in davening, there's a part where we say those words, a sword of two sides. What is the significance of a sword of two sides? And what's the significance of the sword in the first place? What is it you're doing with the sword? So obviously, like I said before, we're having a war with Klippa, and being that there are two possibilities of how Klippa could attack us, so we have to have a sword to cut off the Klippa from one side and to cut off the Klippa from the other side. And that's what he explained before. And after we do the Avodah of Shema, which is the sword, then we're ready to go to the next step, which is do the Avodah of Shemona Esrei, which is the bow and arrow. What is it all about? We'll do that. Hopefully, we'll start tomorrow explaining in the Mir session. Okay, that's what I'm Yeah.
What? I think I'll stop. I didn't realize. The voice was that the seeking rabbi, one day seeking everyone. I'm very. I asked if you could speak to the group, like how does it work? They do have. When we had from February 7th. So it's like very far. So,
You see my schedule. All this time, other than teaching, I do work at the road.
yeah, so like after 3. I don't know who okay. So maybe go to the you know, because
Yeah,
like
of course,
works.
it's like-
Okay, thank you.